Theodore Roosevelt, John Muir, George Catlin, Carleton Watkins, Woodrow Wilson. These are just some of the names recognized for their contributions to creating America's best idea, the National Park Service. Yet too often the name Olmstead is left off this list, despite the generational impacts of both Frederick Law Olmstead and his son and namesake, Frederick Law Olmstead Jr. Olmstead's Yosemite and the Mariposa Grove report is considered by many to be one of the most important foundational documents in American national park history. Frederick Law Olmstead Jr. built upon his father's work to create the National Park Service in 1916, and in his role as a National Park Service advisor. On June 30th, 1864, Abraham Lincoln signed the Yosemite Grant, which set aside 15 magnificent square miles of granite domes, towering waterfalls, and enormous trees for public use, resort, and recreation, inalienable for all time. As the first federally protected land, planning for this new parkland was paramount to success. Who would be selected to chair such an effort? Already well known as a unionist, journalist, and wartime leader of the United States Sanitary Commission, as well as gaining widespread acclaim for designing and supervising the development of New York's Central Park, Frederick Law Olmstead was a fitting choice to chair a commission making recommendations for the future park.
Written during the closing days of the Civil War, Olmstead's 1865 Yosemite Report was a plan for park management and for a post-war society that would embrace equity and benevolence. Olmstead believed parks were necessary for public health and well-being, and for providing people the opportunity to lead fulfilled lives in pursuit of happiness. Olmstead argued that park making should be on equal footing with other major responsibilities of the government, and that the link between park access and the pursuit of happiness is the main duty of the government, if it's not the sole duty of government.
Olmstead's work in Central Park represented a substantial commitment of civic resources for the greater public good, a project worthy of a democratic nation. He astutely pointed out the link between his New York project and Yosemite, noting that the completion of Central Park and the creation of Yosemite Park, both in the midst of the Civil War, were powerful symbols of the Union's durability and a hope for the future. The precedent and promise of Central Park and Yosemite provided the foundations for the park movement in America's national park system. In 1872, Congress designated an astounding 2 million acres as Yellowstone National Park, drawing on Yosemite's example, but on a far grander scale. Over the ensuing decades, with the precedents of Yosemite and Yellowstone in place, Congress gradually identified additional public lands to be set aside as national forest reserves, national parks, and national monuments. On August 25, 1916, Congress continued to embrace their sole duty of the government with the passage of the Organic Act, establishing the National Park Service and placing all existing parks under its management. At the time of the Organic Act, the Department of Interior oversaw 14 national parks, 21 national monuments, and 2 scenic reservations. But there was no unified leadership or organization to operate them. Lacking this, the parks and monuments were vulnerable to competing interests. Who would safeguard or confirm the purpose of all parks, to defend these lands against those who would damage them? Frederick Law Olmstead Jr. was uniquely qualified to draft this 1916 legislation. Olmstead Jr., a landscape architect and park advocate in his own right, drew upon many of the ideas in his father's Yosemite report and helped turn them into law. For example, Frederick Law Olmstead wrote that Yosemite Valley was being preserved forever for popular resort and recreation, and for the free enjoyment of the people. The Organic Act similarly declared that there could be no interference with free access by the public and with the enjoyment of future generations. Despite the inclusive vision, much of these efforts did not account for indigenous groups. As a result, Native Americans were driven from lands they had been connected to physically and spiritually for centuries.
The Organic Act established the basis for the fundamental mission, philosophy, and policies of the National Park Service. While the act was the work of many individuals, it was Olmstead Jr. who wrote the language the National Park Service still uses as our mission statement today. The fundamental purpose is to conserve the scenery and the natural and historic objects and the wildlife therein, and to provide for the enjoyment of the same in such manner and by such means as will leave them unimpaired for future generations.
Between 1916 and 1953, Olmstead Jr. and his firm would undertake a number of diverse conservation efforts in planning and design projects for parks such as Everglades National Park, Great Smoky Mountains, Grand Canyon, and Dinosaur National Monument. Olmstead Jr. also worked on national park sites throughout Washington, D.C., and was a member of the influential Commission of Fine Arts. For almost 4 decades, Olmstead Jr. was a key advisor and mentor to the top leadership of the National Park Service, including his service on Yosemite's advisory board. His time spent working with new leaders of the park preservation movements continued his intentions that the national parks were for future generations.
The Olmsteads are often excluded in the origin story of the National Park Service. The social ideals of public grounds and democratic spaces did not align with the dominant narrative of American exceptionalism in the oncoming 20th century. As we at Frederick Law Olmstead National Historic Site continue to interpret the mission statement of the National Park Service, we reaffirm Frederick Law Olmstead's beliefs that these lands are for the free use of the whole body of the people forever.